On this video, I wanted to give an example of a sugia in what's called the Talmud of Eretz Israel, or Jerusalem Talmud, the Talmud of the land of Israel, that parallels our cycle of Daf Yomi. The reason I decided to make this sample lesson is that right now, of course, a lot of people participate in Daf Yomi on the Babylonian Talmud, and I decided on tractate Sanhedrin when the cycle started. This was a few weeks ago. This is quite a long tractate. It's going to go on for a couple of more months. We're going to be learning this tractate more than for 2 more months. And the Jerusalem Talmud, the Yerushlami, is a little bit shorter, and I'm trying to follow with the lessons in Russian language on the Jerusalem Talmud. And when I got to this particular lesson, which is the beginning of the 4th chapter, 4th perek, I thought that the parallels to Babylonian Talmud and certain other ideas here are so interesting that I thought of making another lesson in English, similar to what I just made in Russian. So we're not going to go through all the words of the sugia, but a lot of these ideas are very, very interesting, and it would give someone who never learned the Jerusalem Talmud a sample, maybe encourage some people to learn in parallel, the 2 Talmuds in parallel. So the Mishnah, the first Mishnah in the 4th perek, that the cycle of Daf Yomi will soon be learning, states that the laws of what's called Dinei Mamonot, the laws of monetary disputes, and the laws of violations for which one can be punished by death penalty, let's say a murderer, those laws are somewhat similar in one sense, and that is that the witnesses need to be checked. There has to be what's called drisha v'chakira. You have to really check and cross-examine the witnesses until you're absolutely sure. You cannot just rely on their testimony right away. But there are differences too in terms of the laws of mamonot and the laws of nefashot, the monetary disputes versus the disputes that for which a person can be given death penalty. And some of the differences include that there needs to be 23 sages in the Sanhedrin in order to punish somebody by death. In Jewish law, the least number of judges that can make a verdict for someone to be executed is 23. Whereas the monetary laws are decided by a small court of just 3 judges. Another difference, the Mishnah tells us, is that when the question of somebody who is maybe has to pay, a monetary question arises, it's enough to have the majority. You could start with any kind of argument. You could start with the argument that the first judge who speaks his opinion about it can say that this person is wrong, he has to pay, or that he is not guilty. Either way is good. But with regards to dinei nefashot, if a person is let's say he's accused of being a murderer, you have to first start looking for some kind of an excuse for him. You have to start, the first judge that speaks his opinion has to bring some kind of an argument for this person. You cannot start with just accusing him. You have to have some kind of at least possibility that maybe this person is not wrong. What it reminded me of is there was a very old American movie that became a classic. It's called 12 Angry Men. And the whole movie is just about basically one scene. I guess it was relatively inexpensive to film such a movie. There's basically 12 men who are part of the jury. In America, of course, you need 12 people to agree for someone to be executed in those states where execution is practiced. At the time of this movie, I think in New York, execution was practiced for murderers. So there were 12 men there that were discussing about a certain young man who was a potential murderer, possibly a murderer. And at first, they sort of all agreed that he should be executed, that he's guilty. And then only one of them kind of had a little bit of doubts and thought, that's way too fast. Let's have at least some discussion. I mean, this person is going to be dead soon if we're going to say that he's guilty. Let's give it a chance. And once he already starts questioning, it turns out that there are other questions about the witnesses, about the details, and at the end of the day, they actually acquit him. That's the whole movie, what it is about. Obviously, the moral lesson is obvious in this movie, and it very much rings to very, very similar to Lehavdil, what it says here about here we had 23 sages, but the first one to speak has to give some kind of a possibility for this person to be not guilty. You have to start with some kind of zechut, learning some kind of merit. So the Babylonian Talmud discusses what kind of learning could it be, what could they possibly say. And the first opinion of Babylonian Talmud seems to be parallel to what it says here in Jerusalem Talmud. But one thing that the first sugia in Jerusalem Talmud that discusses is that even though it's true that from the Torah law, the witnesses have to be checked over, both in the case of monetary disputes and of course in the case of din and nefashot. In both cases, the witnesses have to be checked and rechecked, hakira and drisha has to be done, but that's only the Torah law. However, in order to not, what they call, close the door before someone trying to borrow money, we don't do drisha v'hakira in case of monetary laws, generally speaking. That is, that if a person wants to borrow money, and in Jewish law, of course, you can, a Jew cannot borrow money from another Jew at interest. So the other person is basically doing him a favor by giving him interest-free loan. So if he will know that later, if the witnesses contradict each other somehow or they get confused, he will not get his money back, this will make it very difficult for a borrower to borrow any money. Since the lender knows that very, very likely once the court will do drisha v'hakira, they'll start re-examining, cross-examining the witnesses a lot of times with all kinds of tricky questions, and they'll catch the witness on some kind of a mistake, and that's it. So they won't get their money back. So in order to prevent such a situation, the sages instituted that there will not be a drisha v'hakira in the case of monetary disputes. However, as the Babylonian Talmud continues, and here also the Yerushlami says the same thing. It's very interesting that the words are used differently, but the Yerushlami is saying very similar things to what the Bavli is saying, the Babylonian Talmud. And that is that the Talmud of the land of Israel says that it depends really on whether the witnesses or maybe the people being judged themselves, whether there's some kind of suspicion that something is wrong here. Meaning if the judges see that something is clearly wrong, then they are allowed and should do more and more cross-examinations until they figure out what's going on. However, if everything seems kosher, everything seems okay, there's no reason to assume that the witnesses are lying. Then, in the case of monetary disputes, they do not cross-examine and try to catch them on some kind of on something or on some contradiction between the two witnesses. Another interesting point here in Yerushalmi is that if the witnesses say exactly the same thing, meaning they verbatim say exactly the same thing, one said it and then the other says exactly with the same words, that actually is a good reason to check and recheck. That's a good reason to assume that they lied, because probably they memorized their testimony. It cannot be such a thing that two people are describing the same events, are usually using different vocabulary, different words. If they say exactly the same thing, it must be that something is wrong. So it says that a certain rabbi, Rav Huna, whenever he saw the witnesses that say word to word exactly what the other one said, then he actually digged into this case. But if they seem to be saying differently, but they're obviously describing the same story, then in fact they're more likely to be true, and then he didn't cross-examine. And then, like I said, the Talmud discusses here, what the Babylonian Talmud also discusses, what is this potchim lezechut, that we first try to find merit in the person being judged. What kind of merit can we look for? And apparently, the first idea is very similar to Babylonian idea. Again, the Yerushlami uses different vocabulary, but it's saying the same thing, basically, that we tell the witnesses, who says this person actually committed the crime? Who said, do you really think this person could murder? Is he really a murderer? Now, Babylonian Talmud goes away from it and gives other possibilities of what we may say. One thing that it mentions that we try to pacify the person being judged right away so he doesn't worry. We tell him, if you did not commit this crime, you're not going to be executed. You should know that we will get to the bottom of it. Don't worry. If you're not guilty, you have nothing to worry about. We will find that out. So that may be a kind of pacifying of the person being judged. But here the Yerushlami seems to be saying what originally the Babylonian Talmud also said, that we basically ask if it's really could be true. Could it be that the witnesses are being honest here, that this person could commit a murder, really? That we show them that we don't really believe them. But like I said, the Babylonian Talmud says that that would make it worse for the witnesses. It seems that the Yerushlami is a lot harder to understand. The Jerusalem Talmud is harder to understand than the Babylonian Talmud. But it seems that at least they have also a similar possibility, that this way we may confuse the witnesses and they may actually try to learn merit on the person because they see that we don't trust them anyway. But the most interesting part here is similar to what we have a story like this in Babylonian Talmud in Masechet Eruvin. And that is, it's slightly differently presented here than the Babylonian Talmud, but it's the same idea. Meaning, a sage here says that if a judge cannot find ways to mitaher a sheretz, what they call, make a sheretz clean, literally clean. What's a sheretz? A sheretz is a small animal. There are 8 small animals mentioned in the Torah in the Parshat Shmini at the end of the Parsha. Those small animals, they're not only not kosher, a lot of other animals are not kosher, but these small animals also can make a person ritually unclean if they touch them. What's the difference if you're ritually unclean? Today it's considered we're all ritually unclean. So the difference is you're not allowed to go into the temple. The temple in Jerusalem, only when you're ritually clean you're allowed to go. So if a person touched, for instance, a dead sheretz, a dead salamandra or something, one of those, or a rat, there's 8 of them. Those 8 animals, if the person who touched them when they're dead, he has to go to the mikvah, meaning immerse himself in the water, only then he would be able to go into the temple, for instance, things like that. So there are other consequences of being ritually unclean. To us today, it doesn't really matter. If you saw a dead rat and you had to touch it to move it away, it doesn't really matter because we're all unclean anyway, ritually. But at the time when all these purity laws had practical application, it was important to know. So the person who doesn't know how to make a sheretz clean, meaning argue that the sheretz that the Torah makes unclean actually is clean, it's a kind of scholastics of sorts. It's a kind of rhetoric, which basically you find a lot today in political, for instance, movements, that people just can, some people you could actually hire them for promoting anything and everything. They don't really have a balance in their mind. All they know how to do is promote arguments. They could always promote arguments for anything. So basically, a sage who is able to mitaher a sheretz, who could say that the sheretz, these one of the 8 small animals that are unclean, is actually clean. That only a sage who could do that can find zechut, find merit in a case of an obvious murder. Only he can start by arguing that this person is not really didn't really commit a crime. And they say that there was a certain student of Rabbi Meir who was able to bring 100 arguments why the sheretz is clean. One of the arguments mentioned here, by the way, is the logic is that a dead snake is actually not ritually unclean. It's interesting. You cannot eat a dead snake. A Jew cannot eat a dead snake, but touching it does not make you unclean. Maybe the reason is that the Torah wanted people to not abstain from killing a snake. Otherwise, people who, when ritual purity was practiced, would be afraid to kill a snake and then become ritually unclean, and they won't be able to eat truma and enter the temple. But whatever the case may be, the Torah does not make a dead snake unclean. So logic is, if snake that kills is still clean, how much more so a sheretz, like a dead rat, that doesn't kill anybody, so for sure it has to be clean. Whatever the case may be, this kind of intellectual rhetoric, which doesn't lead anywhere, the Talmud concludes it's actually not a good thing. These people, they don't really have an understanding of right and wrong kind of thing. They just know how to argue in any direction. You have to know where the balance is. One thing is, there are certain Torah laws which are not exactly clear, and there could be arguments in both directions. That's why there are certain disputes in Jewish law, a lot of disputes on the details, on the pratim. And the Talmud Yerushlami itself will mention later this idea that Torah was given that there are arguments sometimes 49 to 49, arguments in something being kosher and something not kosher. But this is only on the borderline cases. You cannot make pig kosher, you cannot make a sheretz clean. All these things, that's already intellectual gymnastics of some sort. This is not right. This is so they said about the student that he possibly was cut off from his portion at Har Sinai, at Mount Sinai, that when the Jewish people all got the Torah, and according to our sages, the souls of the future born Jews were also there, will have a portion in the Torah. Whereas this person, obviously, he has no understanding, and he could balance in any direction he wants and twist things any way he wants and prove that kosher is not kosher or clean is unclean is clean. So this kind of person didn't have his share in Har Sinai. He must have been cut off from his share at Mount Sinai. That's why he is able to argue like that with this kind of scholastics. So I thought that this was an interesting argument, and there's a lot to learn from it in our day too. How much you could distrust the things that these professionals do on the internet and the media. When they twist arguments, you could deny Holocaust, you could prove any kind of thing you want to prove. With all kinds of the wrong arguments, you could make wicked into righteous, righteous into wicked, or anything you want. It's all just a question of argument. May we know how to balance things and how to weigh things and how to actually understand truth from false. May Hashem help us in this. And on this I'm going to end. If you like this video, please press like and please subscribe to our channel.